I think it's really smart to find your people. I found that finding my people helped me find myself.
Welcome to The Third Story. I'm your host, Leo Sidran. You are the listener, and that was singer Amy Cervini of the vocal group Duchess Trio looking around and finding herself. Okay, that was Amy's intro. Here's Hilary's introduction.
It's easier to actually subvert the predominant, paradigm when you're laughing and having fun and joking and kind of playing with it.
Welcome to The Third Story. I'm your host, Leo Sidran. You know who you are, and that was singer Hilary Gardner of the vocal group Duchess Trio on subverting the dominant paradigm through humor. Okay, that was Hilary, and now the last one here is Melissa.
I have these needs I just didn't know that I had. Something about this group really let something loose in Stylianou.
Welcome to The Third Story. I am your host, Leo Sidran. You are a wonderful person, and that was singer Melissa Stylianou of the vocal group Duchess Trio, discovering her own needs and letting loose. Duchess is a three-part close harmony vocal group comprised of, in no special order, Amy Cervini, Hilary Gardner, and Melissa Stylianou. All three of them are accomplished jazz singers in their own right who came together for a one-off gig at the 55 Bar in New York's West Village several years ago and realized that there was something there worth exploring. Although the group is in the tradition of classic three-part singers like the Boswell sisters, their repertoire is eclectic and the musical arrangements are more modern. That's due in large part to the contribution of the talented Oded Lev Ari, who produces their records, writes arrangements, and runs the Anzik label that releases their albums, and he's also Amy's husband. Duchess's live show is cheeky, it's fun, it's hip, it's swinging, it's loose, and it's easy to get with. So, as Hilary says, one might not notice that along the way, they're playing with the classic tropes and assumptions about chick singers from the stage. For example, Hilary has made a habit out of totally objectifying their all-male band when she introduces them to the audience. Which reminds me, I am very available as a sub on that gig if they ever need. I did a short recording session last fall with Duchess and really enjoyed spending time with all of them together. It was clear to me then that talking to all three of them would make sense and give me an opportunity to explore what it's like to be a jazz singer in New York through their collective eyes and their individual experiences. I just had a sense that they would make good podcast guests, and of course they did, so it's not surprising that they're launching their own podcast this month called Harmony and Hijinks. But since you're listening to this podcast, I want to let you know that episodes of The Third Story are now available on SoundCloud. In addition to iTunes, Stitcher, your favorite podcatcher, and the Third Story website, you can also check out previous episodes at soundcloud.com/thirdstorypodcast. The 5 most recent episodes are up now, and more are going up every day. Big shout out to Jeremy the intern for hooking me up. Before we get started with the conversation, here's a little taste of Duchess Trio delivering what they refer to as girl-on-girl harmony. From their forthcoming album, Laughing at Life, which comes out later this month, here's the track, Here's to the Losers.
Here's to those who love not wisely, no, not wisely, but too well.
To the girl who sighs with envy when she hears that wedding bell.
To the guy who'd throw a party if he knew someone to call.
Here's to the losers, bless them all. Here's to those who drink their dinners when the lady doesn't show.
To the girls who wait for kisses underneath the mistletoe.
To the lovely summer lovers when the leaves begin to fall.
Here's to the losers, bless them all. Hey, Tom, Dick, and Harry, coming out of the rain. Those torches you carry must be drowned in champagne. Here's the last toast of the evening. Here's to those who still believe. All the losers will be winners. All the givers shall receive. Here's to trouble-free tomorrows. May your sorrows all be small. Here's to the losers. Bless them all.
Melissa Stylianou,
That's right.
Hilary Gardner,
Yes.
Amy Cervini.
Yes.
Collectively,
Duchess.
oh, that was perfect. Practitioners and purveyors of girl-on-girl harmony.
True.
It's a kind of a modern way of saying something very classic.
Yeah. That's a nice way of putting
buy
it.
that.
I like
Yeah.
that.
I think girl-on-girl harmony sounds like something a little raunchy. It's something it's got a hashtag associated
In
with
fact, yeah. Although we're sort of the only people who seem to be using it.
it. I used it when I went to
did
55
use it.
Bar.
That's true. That's true.
You did.
I love that idea. And I mean, there's something that sounds like new when you say girl-on-girl harmony, but in fact, what you're doing is like really old school.
In some ways, yes. Like the fact that there's three ladies singing in close harmony and being a little campy and having fun, like that's an old school aesthetic. But
Yeah.
there's something, I think there is a modern thread that runs through what we do too. All the arrangements are new for the most part.
Right.
I mean, we're singing a few transcriptions, but almost everything was created
Just for us.
Do you think there is something old school in asking an audience to enjoy themselves overtly at a jazz concert?
It's certainly not the norm these days, I would say that. And it is proving to be a little weird for some people. I mean, you come in and you're like, you know, we have fun and we're laughing, and some
There
people
are kazoos.
Yeah.
Zoos, we're handing out Duchess honey buns.
Yeah,
Mardi
and,
Gras
you know,
beads occasionally.
Yeah, so I think people are a little, but they catch on really quick. Like, I think people want to have a good time. Not every time they go out. You know, I think sometimes they want the world to change and they want to come out with like, you know, lofty ideas and
Yeah.
you know, for the future of music. But I think sometimes people go out to have a good time. I mean, I go out to have a good time and
Yeah.
to be entertained sometimes, and I think that's the thing that sort of, and not with everyone. There are plenty of people out there doing it, but I think it's something that's definitely not normal right now.
The three of you are individually great singers, have your own individual careers. I want to talk about that a little bit. But the reason we're here is because, you know, you've sort of chosen to get together and do this thing. How is it different to be in a group, and how have you felt the differences in your individual careers as opposed to being in a group?
I think we all agree that it's in a lot of ways easier, especially with these two crazy ladies. We're sharing the load musically. We're sharing the load in terms of the business end, although Amy takes most of that,
No,
really.
I-
Yeah.
All right.
We have individual tasks that we do.
Like a band.
Like a real band.
I got a call this morning and the person said, God, I love that you have like a standing Friday rehearsal and meeting with your group every week. And I kind of thought, like, yeah, gosh, what if I did that for myself? You know, I mean,
Right.
there's something about the obligation, which I don't mean in a weighted kind of heavy sense, but in being accountable
Yeah.
to other people and sort of literally being face to face every week. And maybe we're going to sing something and maybe we're going to talk about stuff we need to do or send some emails, or maybe we're just going to look at each other and be like, all right, what's next? What do we do?
Do you think it's easier to send the email, book the gig, promote something that you know is not just a representation of you personally,
You
but
bet.
has is like something bigger than you?
I feel that for sure. When I'm talking with people about Duchess, it's so easy for me to access that enthusiasm. Also because what we do is so fun. I'm not having to put any of that on, and people love it. So it's,
But there's
you know, it's
a
not
huge
hard
difference
sell.
between saying I do this, I like to sing these songs, this is my music, as opposed to this is the music that we make, this is what we do.
Yeah.
And that's a strange thing, because I do think that the sort of cliche stereotype around the chick singer that's a lot of baggage that you carry when you walk into a room,
Yeah.
especially as a single singer.
Well, I think the whole idea of what we do being so infused with humor and having fun, and it's, I keep thinking about this idea of joy as a political statement. Not that we have to go that direction, but
Let's do
like
it.
what we're doing is it's really fun, and it is really exuberant, and it can be a little bit of a departure from, you know, from what we think of about a jazz show. So in that way, it is, like Melissa said, it is an easier sell, and it takes a special kind of, I've had to really, really work over the years to like try even just doing gigs under my own name. Like I'd been in New York 10 years before I started to say like, hi, you should bring me in with my band because I'm making this record and I want to do a gig here. It took me literally a decade to do that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the people, whether or not they're really, really talented, and some of them are amazing and some of them are just really great hustlers, but the people that tend to have, the high profile careers have the ability to self-promote in a way that they're really not shy or embarrassed about. And I admire that, but it's much easier to do it on behalf of what we are creating together because it's going to be so fun, not because I want.
Because I have this need to express something to you.
Yeah.
Although we do have a need to
do.
express. And I have these needs I just didn't know that I had. Like it's something about this group really lets something loose in Stylianou that just there's no place for it in the other stuff that I do, which I also love to do, and I need to do that as well to satisfy those needs and desires. But I really, and when we're not together for a couple of weeks, we really feel it. We really miss each other a lot, and when we're not singing every couple of weeks, it's like there's a little hole in my life.
There's a hipness, and the arrangements are hip, and it works musically, and musicians watch it and can appreciate what's happening. But it's also show business on a level that I think a lot of times people are, even singers, are afraid to cop to or admit, no, you don't have to be a jazz fan.
We
That's
prefer
right.
that you're not, frankly. Let's
Why?
No, I mean, I'm kidding, but I will say this. There's a stigma about liking jazz that suggests that there are prerequisites that must be met before you can come to a jazz show and be welcomed and to understand the music. And I think that's a largely false perception. I think there's a ton of really great, accessible jazz music, and even stuff that's maybe not so accessible. People can still dig it without being a self-professed jazz fan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that it's not something that so many people would feel confident and shout to the rooftops. Yeah, I'm in a band that's entertaining and we're putting on a show. But also, it's hard to do. I will say that it's it comes fairly easily to the three of us. We're not having to like really psych ourselves up to get on stage and do this, but it's there's a craft to this as well that is that's part of making music and always has been for me. But it's like it's the most fun thing that I do on stage is sing with Duchess, absolutely. But it's work too. It's not just like, okay, we're just gonna like let our hair down and
get the champagne.
Yeah,
I mean, we think about
we do that too.
We have to discuss. Well, what are we going to wear? It has to, and that sounds frivolous. It sounds like, oh, the girls, what are you going to wear? But actually, it's presentational. But what are we going to wear?
I'm glad that you bring this up because people project a lot on singers, and and on male singers, I'm sure they do too. They're just differently. But on female singers, people project. I mean, men and women project.
Yeah, I think we play with that idea of our emotional calibration and silliness and femininity as part of the show, and we acknowledge and poke fun at that baggage. I mean, that's what the whole band introduction is all about.
Right.
We have fun with those ideas, and audiences are willing to have fun with us. It's easier to actually subvert the predominant paradigm when you're laughing and having fun and joking and kind of playing with it. It's easier to do that.
That is a really good point, right?
Yes.
People don't realize what's happening to them when it's happening in the context of a good time.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing sets us apart from the other people in the scene for sure. And the fact that we're doing it in the way that we're doing it, and then the fact that it's so good. Like, so we're not a retro act, we're not a tribute act.
Yeah.
And we have these new arrangements, and it's a real show, and we're not shy about that. And
but also, I think to your point, though, by the same token, for all that it's new and different, there is a template for this. Like people see
People
three
know.
girls and the word harmony, like they know what that is.
Yeah.
It's really clear.
Yeah.
I think that what we're presenting is really clear, and we've worked really hard to really clear that up even more. We're like, no, this is what we do. We're doing this kind of music, but it's got this sophistication, and it's got this contemporary edge, and it's our personalities too, and so I think that's been really, really clear. And we've spent a lot of time, talking about the brand, if you will,
Yes.
and the musical sound that we want, and down to the types of players that we use and why.
And are those the same kinds of questions that you do or did ask yourself about your own personal career?
maybe should have. I think that it's the first time that I found myself asking these questions to this extent about something that I'm putting forth musically.
Yeah.
I think that it's an excellent exercise to go through as a musician. You know, what am I saying? I have, of course, thought about that, but it's to a different degree.
Well, and
with
I think
this
it
group.
becomes more overtly a conversation when you have to make those decisions with other people. Like when
Yes.
you're doing it yourself, you could be thinking in the shower, oh, well, I should do this. And this person makes me, but you don't consider that as part of your process because you're just kind of like walking down the street. But
Right.
you can't just talk in your head when you're dealing, when you're in this sort of a situation. So it becomes an actual exercise instead of just like something you contemplate on the subway.
Yeah.
I used to be a manager, so I also have that. And even that wasn't me that I was pushing.
Right.
But even that sort of, it felt different. It wasn't as, not that I didn't love those people I was working for and believe in what they did, but it felt different than this. I feel like this I just want to share.
Yeah.
And it's that like it's coming from a place I want to share my own stuff too, but I know that it's a harder, that I'll be convincing people. And with this, sometimes I send out an email and I don't even ask for anything. I just say, this is what we're doing, and I think you'll really dig it. And I hope that you like it. And there's no ask, which is nice.
Amy, I understand this came out of a residency that you had at the 55 bar, and you sort of put the first gig together.
Yeah. We did this as a one-off, for sure. I don't think, we didn't, we had 8 tunes, and we did the same set twice. We weren't really, we had music stand in front of us. We were, not expecting necessarily what happened. And so in that way, it took off. The place was packed. And, even in terms of our first year after the first record came out was so amazing. I have to say that it's the easiest thing I've ever done business-wise. I got answers from people that never answered. Like I've been emailing them for years. Please listen to this and listen. And not only for me, for all these other great musicians that I worked with, but it was still, there was not the same kind of response as when I sent this out.
I'm like a little bit fixated on this band concept. A lot of popular music happens as in the band format.
I personally have always felt more comfortable in a band situation, but it's marketing-wise, it was always easier to just call it my name.
Yeah.
And there's also the part where, I went to one of my bands and said, so guys, let's make this a collective.
Yeah.
Let's really I want you guys to tell me what you feel about the music, and you do that even without me asking you to do that. So let's take this to the next level, and business-wise, let's make it a collective. And I wasn't suggesting getting married and doing the paperwork, but just, so that we were all three, and they were just like, nah, it's cool. I'm good. You just
Rather have
keep
you just
going.
keep doing-
I mean, that's part of it, I think. And once it at the same time as it's, amazing to have the three of us. We share the load, and we're in this together.
We're
and,
definitely married.
We're absolutely married. But it also, God forbid anything, should hit the fan. Like that makes it does make it a little bit harder at the end of the day to we're going down together is basically how it is. And that's a responsibility, I think, for each one of us.
Well, the marriage
to each
metaphor
other.
is apt, actually, because there's always a contingency that we don't need no piece of paper to define our relationship. But actually, what that piece of paper, in this case, right, it's a formal business agreement or arrangement that's been notarized and it's taxable and all that stuff. What it actually does is it defines the institution, whatever it is, and it makes it harder to just bail, which I think is valuable in music and marriage, because sometimes stuff, knock on wood again, this hasn't happened for us at this point, but sometimes, if you didn't have something superimposed on your partnership, it might be tempting to just bail. It's easier to just bail. And there's a tremendous value in working through it and honoring the agreements and, sort of duking your way through it. Yeah. Wow, I feel like I've just revealed something about
your
my own
personal
life. But I'm actually not. I'm really speaking in metaphor.
Well,
Love you, Eli.
In your own lives, you are all married to people who are also musical. I guess I haven't spent a lot of time talking to women who are married to musicians. I've talked to a lot of male musicians who are married to singers or have girlfriends who are singers.
Well, that goes that way.
Why does it go that way?
I think some of it is just proximity, right? We all meet people at work or in our social circle. I mean, I think some of that answer is really just not very interesting. It's just, well, that's who you meet and that's who you work with. Right. Yeah. I definitely think in the arts too, though, there's plenty of people who say, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm not married to someone who's in music. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
But I also think that there's a sizable number of people, who, myself included, who I need to have a partner who understands at a deeper level what this is, because I don't have a choice. I'm sure that's true for all of us. Like, this is what we do, but it is also who you are when you go into a life in the arts. It's both. You are your job. And that's not true really of most jobs.
That's right.
So
yeah, that takes a special sort of understanding. Like, someone could say, who's not actually doing this, oh yeah, I would get it. But then come down to it, and honey, I'm about to go and do another $20 gig, and we're going to pay $70 on a babysitter. You're welcome. Like, that's not going to, there will not be that deeper understanding of what that means and why it's important.
We're not having Valentine's Day together. I'm rarely going to be available for like the weekend getaway, or I mean, all of those things. Yeah. Evenings, national holidays, weekends.
Despite the fact that your hashtag hasn't caught on
yet,
how important is social media in your lives and careers?
Well, as Duchess, it's very important, and that's kind of the only time I do it. I'm like, it's sort of like going to the gym is easier with someone else, which I don't know anything about. But when it comes to social media, I'm like, okay, I'm motivated and I do it. But I would say, I mean, for me, it seems like it's a big part of our lives, but what do you guys think? Okay. Are we doing it enough?
I really liked social media a lot in my personal life, and I found that being active in my personal life made the professional stuff more effective on social media. But after the election, I took down my personal Facebook page. I had the max, I had like 5,000 friends, which obviously they're strangers, right? I probably had like 200 friends, and then the rest is just noise. So I found that to be too noisy. So I have just a music page and a Twitter and Instagram. But we love, Instagram is really fun.
Instagram's a good place for Duchess.
And we have some great, great photos. Again, it's utilitarian, but we have some assets that, visual assets. We have great photographs, and we make silly flyers for our shows and whatever. And I think that's been a big part of some of the, we got a huge feature in Downbeat the first year that we existed. And we thought that, I'm sure that part of that in any case we've concluded is because we had great pictures that they could use. Yep. So social media is really effective in that way. You can maximize, the potential of having all those tools.
And you can say something about yourself. I mean, visual language is another way of communicating, but so is musical language. So you guys are going to sing something here and now.
Here and now.
2 ukuleles, 3 ladies.
One catastrophe.
What are you singing?
My Little Grass Shack. Not a euphemism.
I wanna go back to my little grass shack in Kealakekua, Hawaii. I wanna be with all the Connies and Wahinis that I knew long ago. I can hear old guitars a-playing on the beach at Honau. I can hear old Hawaiians saying, Komo mai no kaua ika hale wala kahau. It won't be long till my ship will be sailing back to Kona. A grand old place that's always fair to see. I'm just a little Hawaiian and a homesick island boy. I wanna go back to my fishing port. I wanna go back to my little grass shack in Kealakekua, Hawaii, where the humu humu nuku nuku apua go swimming by.
Perfect.
Nailed it. Duchess Trio singing My Little Grass Shack, which is not a euphemism for anything that I can think of. Folks, you don't have to be able to sing 3-part harmony to listen to the Third Story podcast. Just visit third-story.com to check out episodes, videos, photos, comments, the whole shebang. And that is a euphemism. Here we explore the backgrounds of Hilary, Melissa, and Amy. Each of them has a different history and way that they came to the music and to being a professional singer. But like so many creative people living in New York, they all share one thing in common. They came from somewhere else, and it's probably not where you would expect. In the case of Amy and Melissa, Toronto, Ontario, in the great nation of Canada. In Hilary's case, it's a bit further still, Wasilla, Alaska, which is in America, but I have heard it said that on a clear day, you can see Russia from there.
Not a one of you is a New York native. In fact, you're all really like from totally not New York.
Exactly.
Hilary, I think that your existence on the planet
Yes.
recalibrates the psychic imbalance created by Sarah Palin. Because you are from
Wasilla, Alaska.
So that's a pretty unlikely place to come from if you're expecting to pursue a career in jazz.
You betcha, as she would say, in fact. Yeah, I mean, but the longer that I've been away from it, and I have been away from Wasilla for 21 years or so, I mean, it's been a long time. I fled as soon as I could. In hindsight, I mean, I was so fortunate. I got some extraordinary musical education that would have been extraordinary in any context. It would have been excellent here in New York City, you know? So I was really lucky. But yeah, it certainly wasn't a jazz hotbed. Like it literally didn't exist. My first concert, the Manhattan Transfer came through when I was in high school. So I got to see the Manhattan Transfer. They came and performed at the Performing Arts Center in Anchorage and, were rapturously received. I mean, that's the beauty of playing outside of New York City. In New York, the audiences are they're very sophisticated and they're very, they're knowing and they have seen a lot and they have a lot of options and there can be that's wonderful to play to people who sort of get everything, in terms of silly references or they know all the obscure songs or whatever. But there's a little bit of a jaded quality where they're kind of like, all right, impress me.
Yep.
What you got? You leave New York City and you go to a place like Anchorage where there is a performing arts center and people will come out to hear whoever is playing there because that's what's in town. And they're really delighted and they're much more, audiences outside of New York, I think are they're very open. They're like, we're really excited who are you? What are you all about? Yeah, it was Manhattan Transfer. It was my first concert. And then I graduated high school and I left. And I can't say that I am burning to go back to Wasilla, Alaska.
Were you a fan of the Manhattan Transfer before you saw that concert?
I was, yeah. I had discovered, we had a record player. My parents had lots of vinyl. And I found their first album, or maybe it wasn't their first, it was their self-titled album in a record store, in a thrift store, record bin or something. And it was in mint condition. And it's that one with the black and white cover that's the deco sort of art graphic. So I was that aesthetic was always exciting to me. My grandparents were huge fans of the big band. They were from the Midwest, so they would go out and they heard all the big bands. And so I was drawn to that aesthetic and I brought the record home. And from those first notes of Tuxedo Junction, I was like, what's happening? This is awesome. So I was a big fan.
But before you came to New York, you cut your teeth in Seattle. Had you come to New York right away? I mean, what would be different? What did you gain from the time that you spent in Seattle before you came here?
Well, it was a very forgiving place to be in your early 20s. I logged a couple of years at a little liberal arts school in Tacoma studying classical voice, and I dropped out. And I didn't really have a plan.
Yeah.
And so I decided, well, heck, I like Seattle.
Yeah.
And I'll just live there and decide what I want to do next. I certainly wasn't planning on singing anymore necessarily or singing jazz. I mean, I just didn't know. I was not yet 20 and I needed something to do and it wasn't going to be going back to Alaska. So I moved to Seattle and I was able to, had a great little apartment in the center of town with a Space Needle view and I could walk to everything. And I was able to keep that roof over my head and begin my foray into life on my own, bussing tables. I mean, you could make enough money to do that. My rent was like $450 a month for this, what is in New York, probably a junior 1-bedroom. But so, yeah. And I started singing, a little bit of jazz because I wanted to have fun singing again, which I hadn't been. And I was just horribly green and people were really nice to me.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot, and you could sound horrible, and I did, and have a lot of gigs, and it was really, really forgiving.
Yeah.
And in New York, New York is many things, and I love it to pieces, but it is not forgiving.
Right.
In that way. I mean, not financially, and I mean, it is forgiving in the sense that I was really, really green and sounded horrible when I came to New York, and I was able to sort of like still hang on. But I think a lot of that is just like I wasn't going to go home. I had to figure out some way to make it work.
Right. Melissa, when I met you, you had already established yourself in Canada. You had a career in Toronto. You had been working. So what was that transition like for you? And what was happening for you before you came here?
Things were going really, really well
Yeah.
in Toronto. Really well.
That was my memory.
I was touring the country, doing the jazz festivals with my band, and I'd put out 3 records on my own, and I had a band, a real band, and it was great. And then I went to the Banff Center and I did the jazz workshop, and I met a bunch of musicians from around the world, but a lot of musicians from New York. And I was the only singer that year. It was the first year that Dave Douglas took over the program. And they didn't have anyone on vocal faculty, kind of on purpose. And it was, I was just, I was sitting with the cellos trying to work on this, George Lewis music and trying to sight read this crazy atonal stuff and crying. Not right there. I got it together. But as soon as I got back to the room, I was like, I don't have any buttons. So it was a really great learning experience and doing a lot of free singing, which I'd never done before. We did John Zorn's Cobra game for a week, and it was so amazing. And so I went back to Toronto and was like, oh no, what am I doing? There are things that I didn't know I could do, and I'd like to explore them. And I knew that New York was the place I needed to be to learn from people who had done a lot of different things. So I applied for a grant, and I came down and studied with Theo Bleckman and Gary Dial and my still current voice coach, Tom Schilling, who now is based in Hamilton, Ontario. So it's a bit of but he had a lovely, lovely apartment on 72nd in Amsterdam when I first moved here. So I came down here on a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts. Thank you, Canada. And just fell in love as soon as I got here. It's like, wow. And I didn't move here alone, which helped. Jamie Reynolds, my husband, actually applied for the grant at the same time, miraculously got the grant at the same time.
Wow.
And we moved down the same day, and he came down to study with Fred Hirsch. And so we moved here, and I met Amy shortly after, and I got a couple of gigs, and for some reason I started booking that little cafe on Fifth Avenue, Perch Cafe. And it was wonderful because I called up Ben Monder and was like, hey, you want to come play a $50 gig with me? And he said yes. And I just dove right in and started to try to figure out what I wanted to do, and spent a couple years doing that. So yeah, I had Toronto as my learning, as my learning place. I studied acting, so I didn't go to music school, but I did a lot of private, taking lessons here and there with people, wonderful singers like Carol Welsman. And then, of course, people here in New York. But I had that experience in Toronto of playing with a lot of veteran jazz musicians who were very, very kind to me. And it was a great place to learn the craft, on the job.
What is the scene like? What is the mentality of the players in Toronto? Is there a sense of community? Is there a sense that it's a vibrant scene?
Well, it's on the one hand, I feel very equipped to answer that question, except my answer is about 11 years old.
Yeah.
But we also just spent some time playing with incredible Canadian musicians. And every time I go up to Canada, I play with, I play with my Canadian band up there, Nick Fraser and Andrew Downing, and Jamie's often up with us. And there's such a deep scene of incredible musicians and a very deep tradition of quote unquote mainstream or kind of down the middle jazz playing, a lot of great jazz schools, but not just that. I mean, it has a reputation for a very strong scene in that regard, but there are a lot of really curious and adventurous musicians, young, old, in between, a lot of great people teaching, taking over positions at the school. So it's a really vibrant scene. Now, there are not enough places to play. I could probably count them on one hand, but people do find places. They find and create places to play and find loft spaces and stuff. So it has in terms of the density of the population in the town, it's got a really large scene, actually. So,
you mind if I?
Amy, I was just going to say, you must be so ready to jump
chime in.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been gone for even longer.
Yeah.
So my perspective is truly an outsider perspective, except that I get these little glimpses from my brother's life he moved here and then went back. So for me, the sound, the Canadian jazz sound, which for me, every time I went back was so evident. I mean, it was major sevens, like just all the time. In the writing specifically, it was a lot of that, and something a little less or a lot less aggressive than what was happening here. And I think, New York is the capital of aggression, but
In a good way.
in a very charming way. But I remember my brother auditioning when I was at NEC for NEC, and I, at that point I had been there. So one of the faculty members came out to me and he said, "Oh, Amy, you got to tell your brother, he's great, but man, he's got to play through that cymbal because he's got that Canadian ride thing and it's just not going to work here." And I was like, whoa, okay. And I thought about that and I was like, whoa, that is a lot of what it is. Like there's this play through the ride instead of on top of it that wasn't happening as much in Toronto, certainly at that time. And I think probably in a lot of other places. I don't have
everywhere. I
Yeah.
don't know any place where it like drives as hard as
No.
New York. And I think it's because there's a hunger here.
Yeah.
If you're going to do this, you have to want it so badly and be willing to do it. And it drives harder because of that.
But Ernesto went back home
Yeah.
and had a problem because
playing too hard.
Because he's playing too hard.
Yeah.
And people were like, I mean, my brother is a loud drummer. That's just kind of his vibe. He can play quiet, but he doesn't want to. But he had a problem when he first came back because it was just so different. But I think there are so many musicians who have been here
Yes.
and gone back. And so he's finding his people.
When Melissa was describing the experience of having to sing with a bunch of horn players and going back to her hotel room and lamenting the fact that she didn't have any buttons, I thought of you because I know that you started out as a saxophone player and at a certain point decided that you felt freer expressing yourself without buttons than with buttons. Can you just tell me a little bit about that and how you came through that?
I was sitting here listening to these ladies and thinking about how different my path was to get here. I mean, I had more of a traditional, I was a classical pianist forever until I didn't have to do that anymore. But I also played the saxophone, and those were my two things. And because I was a girl, I sang in the big band. And because I loved singing, but it wasn't something, I never had a lesson. I don't think ever growing up. And I had lessons on everything all the time. I mean, that was definitely something that was given to me. But I never took a voice lesson. And when I went to audition for NEC, I played the saxophone, and then they said, "Well, it says here that you sing." I was like, "Yeah? Well, could you sing something?" And I was like, "Oh, God, I mean, I've just been in the car for 8 hours. Are you serious? You want me to?" She was like, "Yeah, whatever you want. Just pick a standard." And again, I don't know any keys. I was like, okay, so what can I do in the fake book key? And so I picked something. I said, "Do you want me to, should I take a solo?" He was like, "Oh, you could do that?" And I was like, "Yeah. I'll do that." And so I did that, and I'm convinced that that's why I got into the school in the first place, just because of that combination of things. And my thing with the buttons, I think, is like I had to practice so much as a kid that I had a practice issue. So I didn't do all the shedding. Once I got to school and no one was watching me anymore, I was like, see ya, I'm just going to have fun. And I didn't know how to sort of self-regulate. And so everyone around me was, Jerry Bergonziing all over the place. And I was like, I will still do my pretty lines that are very melodic, and didn't ever sort of hop on board with what you need to do in order to make improvising easy. I loved being in the big band. Put notes in front of me. Awesome. Like it was one line. There was no, I'm used to playing piano, which is, all those, so many black notes on the page. And then it was one line. I was like, this is fantastic. I just have to. So for me with singing, it was just everything that I wanted to say without the burden of having to press the right button. So it was a different experience, and, I think something about going to NEC and studying with Dominique Eade, she has this way of just letting you figure out who you are without sort of imposing her agenda on you, which I think in any school, it's hard. I did take lessons with Jerry Bergonzi, and you learn those patterns. That's what you do. Well, or
you learn Jerry's thing.
Yeah, and it's his thing, and then you go and you study with Garzone, and you learn his thing. And I mean, I never did the Garzone thing, but Dominique just kind of opened doors and was like, so what do you think about this one? And let's try this one and check out this person, and sort of let you, it's evidenced by the amount of like the different kinds of singers that have come through NEC. I mean, everyone's doing something totally different. No one is, you can hear Dominique every so often, but only if you know her really well, because we're all doing totally different kinds of music.
Did you feel more in touch with your ability to be expressive with the voice?
Yeah, for me, it was really mostly about because I hadn't studied voice, I didn't have any of the stuff. So that was sort of liberating. I was like, no one's telling me, like Dominique tried to do, technique and stuff with me. And it's not that I didn't do it, but I didn't like dive in. There was just something, I don't even think it was the words, because I'm horrible at memorizing words. I mean, so it wasn't this ability that you get as a singer to tell an actual story in words instead of just through notes. But there was something just natural about it that I dug. And I really had been studying for so long. So the stuff was in my ears. That was definitely, growing and happening. I just had no way on the saxophone, partly because of the misery and partly because of the inability to practice properly and actually translate the knowledge from, the page or my brain to the stage. And that only happened when I was singing.
Amy Cervini on the translation between the brain and the voice. Folks, you don't need a translator to talk to me. I tweet at Leo Sidran. Find me on Facebook at Third Story Podcast, or you can hook up with me at third-story.com. This is a good time to mention that if you like this conversation, you might like previous episodes with Janice Siegel of the Manhattan Transfer, Becca Stevens, Kurt Elling, or Joe Laurie. All of them wonderful singers with wonderful stories to tell. In this final part of my conversation with the Duchess Trio, we cover a collection of questions I've been keeping, including how they approach choosing their repertoire, the ever-elusive blend, whether or not there's really enough work to go around, what advice they have for up-and-coming singers, and what's the real deal with My Funny Valentine.
It occurred to me thinking about all three of you today that singers have a very different challenge because you're quite often singing words that are not yours and that you have to sort of make your own. Just from the point of view of the classic jazz vocalist, how do you deal with finding a way to deliver them as yours? They're really in your voice. How do you do that? Is it something that you think about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's about picking, there's a difference between a song that everybody knows and a song that everybody associates with one artist or one version of that song, And in general, I make it a policy to stay completely away from any song that has an iconic association with an artist or a particular rendition, because that's just a recipe for comparison. And if you're talking about, a comparison with Frank Sinatra or Billie Holiday, you will always come out short. I will never understand why people want to invite that, because they are the bar, right? But Frank Sinatra sang a ton of songs that I would absolutely want to sing. And for me, that's always just about, is it a good lyric? Is it something that, I always just think about the lyric. And if it's something that I relate to or believe in or have believed in, then it's very easy to be authentic with it, even if it's not something that I've penned myself. It's, that's, I think, the genius of those great standards is that they do hold up and they are universal,
Well, and is it harder to come by songs in the contemporary world that hold up in the same way, or are we just not used to looking for them, or they're not written in the same architecturally in the same way, so we have to find creative ways to adapt them?
That's key. It very often, you can play with form and contemporary songs, depending on where they come from and who wrote them and how they're constructed, they have a different goal, right? I mean, Superstition, Stevie Wonder, that's an amazing song.
Yeah.
But I would argue that it's equally, if not, even more about that groove and that bass line, all of these components that have nothing to do with the message of the song, right? It's its own thing. But like a Tom Waits tune, you can play with the form, you can play with the structure, and the melody kind of exists in a certain way. And
I was at Jazz Connect a couple weeks ago. I ran into you guys, and I heard a panel Mark Ruffin from Sirius was asked about how he listens to all the new CDs that he gets. And he said, he just has piles and piles. And he talked about the image of seeing a jazz vocal record from a singer that he doesn't know for the first time, and just how he makes a very quick assessment of the record. And one thing he said is, I just can't hear the same tunes again. I just need to see some material that is going to make me notice for a second, And it gave me a sense of how challenging it is to choose your material and how much.
I mean, sort of, but there's so much material.
There's a lot.
It's so much. If you care
Yeah.
and if you listen to music, it's endless.
Yeah.
I mean, I started digging into Rodgers and Hart stuff with Ehud recently, the piano player that I work with. I'm like, it never ends.
Yeah,
There
stuff
is
that you've
so
never
much-
heard.
Yeah.
Completely. And
Yeah.
Amazing.
it's bottomless. If you care and you're seeking it out, I get frustrated when I go hear somebody or I see a recording come out and it's like the same 6 standards and a very note for note faithful reconstruction of Nina Simone's Feeling Good and Buy My Jazz Record. Why? Why would I do that? I know my Funny Valentine. I think it's important. You should have something that people are familiar with and that can anchor them and make them go, oh, I know that I want to hear what they do with it, right? But if the whole record is just that sort of uninspired, why? Why are you doing it?
But so My Funny Valentine is like the bebop saxophone player blowing on rhythm changes, right? Every singer sort of has to have a way of delivering My Funny Valentine.
Yeah, mine is under protest on Valentine's Day once a year on that gig, and
I don't
that's
think I've
my
ever sung
signature
that song.
approach.
Really?
Yeah. But I have always kind of been crazy about not doing the jazz material and trying to find different ways. I mean, I did Weezer. I kind of am psychotic like that. But I also will say that I did.
But it was great.
It was pretty fun. I did a show, I don't know how many, 2 years ago or something. It was a one-off and we never did it again. But I called it Overdone Standards. And I only did overdone standard. We only did those songs that you're like, please don't make me ever hear this again. But the only reason it worked is because of the band that I put together. And I told them, I was like, okay, guys, we're going to play the most ridiculous, wedding band standards. But we are not going to follow anything that's ever done before with these. We're just going to go and we're going to find out where it goes and we're going to go there. And it was really fun. I mean, we had a great time, but that was a purposeful
That's a real
sort
concept.
of right. It's not. We weren't just doing My Funny Valentine.
It wasn't an unironic reading of Bye Bye Blackbird and Misty, right?
Yeah,
I mean, and those are great songs.
But this
Misty's a great
becomes
song.
this becomes you don't feel that way about Bye Bye Blackbird?
As lyrically, like for a singer, I don't.
Yeah.
There's nothing to it. I
Yeah.
think it's it's great. I've heard people play it and it's beautiful
Yeah.
and whatever, but it doesn't mean anything. I remember in a workshop or something, a singer wanted to sing it and it was very theatrical. She'd constructed this whole sort of backstory about what it really meant. And, it was so elaborate. I was just kind of like, okay, but really the tune is what it is and it doesn't,
You have
the
to
lyric
work
doesn't
that
say
hard.
anything. Well, right.
Yeah.
All right,
But this is a question not only for singers, but just in general about music. We want to contribute. We want to be able to make our own statement. We don't want to be trapped in the past. And yet, if you're breaking out of tradition for the sake of breaking out of it, it might not be for the best either. And that leads me to Duchess, because you guys are,
Oh, right.
are in this band, are singing new arrangements, new material, finding deep cuts, all that stuff, but has its own legacy. So when you do that, you're inserting yourself into a legacy that already exists, and you can work within that tradition.
I think we're definitely stepping into that stream, but in terms of being in that tradition and of that tradition, it's a little different. We're kind of using the Boswell sisters as a jumping off point, and we found this thing that happens when the three of us sing together, especially an Oded chart, which is just not only tailor made and in exactly the right key, but he knows us and our voices and our personalities so intimately that he's writing arrangements that allows for our personalities to come through and inside jokes and all that. And it's a really vibrant and now thing, jumping out of this tradition of for the most part close harmony that is from that era. But it's we're certainly not trying to come up into the same areas some of the other 3-part harmony groups that are about these days.
Who are the other
I'm trying
three-part
to think
harmony
of this,
groups that are about these days?
Papini sisters.
So as you know, but we're definitely not like a retro.
It's not a tribute
thing, not a
It's not
tribute thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
Papini
right.
is doing modern stuff.
that what
They
they
do
do?
like Staying Alive in with a swing, like this modern jukebox kind of
Right.
situation, which we're also not.
What are your thoughts on the modern jukebox situation? Have you
Ask Hilary.
Have you discussed
Don't
that?
ask Hilary.
Have you talked about this?
I'm always happy to see anybody find success.
Well done.
Yes.
No, I mean, I
done.
mean it. I mean it. A lot of people dig it, and a lot of people respond to it, and I think it's great. For me, it's like I feel like it's jazz and great big quotes for people who don't like jazz, and
Right.
that's fine, and that's all I'm going to say.
It's digestible, right?
And the people, I will say, the people who do it are fiercely talented. Like some
Killer.
of these singers, they're all great
Yeah.
musicians. It's just, you got to have a gimmick. It works, and it's a gimmick.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of having gimmicks, do you have not that you have a gimmick?
We
but
do.
There are
But there's some
kazoos and
gimmicks.
Hawaiian lays.
Do you have so I saw you guys at the 55 bar last month, and it seemed like you have kind of developed your personas on stage. Hilary, you definitely are like the man eater kind of. Is that what you're going for?
That's
She's
not just on
amazing.
stage. Yeah, cue Hall and Oates.
But is there like are you kind of developing personas? Is that happening?
It happened. It happened on the first gig
Kinda
somehow.
did. I think they're all organic to us. I don't think that we're not
Right.
acting necessarily, but it's a part of us that is allowed sort of a place
Yeah.
in this particular, combination of things. And I think it just ended up happening that way. And it was so organic that we fed off of each other, which then amplified our individual, places. But it's definitely, it's a heightened version of us.
As my dad says, jazz musicians are just like you and me, only more so.
I love it.
Do you change the way you think about singing when you're having to blend?
That's something that has been consistent from the beginning, is that I feel like we're all in agreement. We do not think about that at all. I'm sure that we do change things because, this is a porous thing. It's happening in real time and we are blending, and our blend is pretty amazing, but it's nothing that we've had to work on that I've ever thought about.
You don't talk about the blend.
No.
No.
We're thinking about making music.
Yeah.
As
Right.
like we're never, I don't think, going, now's where I have to blend.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like that's not
It's never been
something-
hard either, which was one of
No.
the reasons why we are still doing this. I think was immediately
Right.
it was like something just locked in. The other day when we were doing that thing for Michael Bourne, and we were singing together and pretty much hearing each other just acoustically,
Right, yeah.
because we didn't really have a monitor so much. Just a couple of those chords, and Here's to the Losers. I was just like, my whole body started to vibrate in a different way, which is also probably one of the reasons why I'm still in the band, because it's like it's good for me. It feels so good.
If I were to tell you that I have a really good friend and she's a great singer and she's moving to New York this week and she's really excited to join the fray and become a jazz singer, what do you feel emotionally when I say that? And what would you say to her?
I'd say welcome. I mean, I feel like it is New York is a tough city to live in lots of ways, and the scene is not as forgiving as the place that I come from. But when I landed here as a younger jazz singer from elsewhere, and just meeting people and getting people friends, making friends and feeling the support of the scene was something I felt really strongly. So I think that, and that still exists. So that's my 2 cents.
I think it's exciting and great. And while I said earlier that I don't believe that New York is forgiving, and in a way that's true, I also believe that New York is extremely generous. And if you do basic things like show up on time and honor your obligations and be as prepared as you can be, like these things that are not necessarily musical, if you just handle yourself like a responsible, considerate adult, the scene is very generous and very forgiving, actually, in some way. Like you'll be okay. You'll learn on the job and people will hire you. Even if you have a lot to learn, there's a generosity in the scene where people will want to teach you and bring you into the fold, because if they perceive a sincere desire to learn and to be a part of it, and a willingness to be a professional, even as you're getting your chops together. Yeah. So welcome. I echo.
You
Yeah.
echo. You
this
echo.
statement.
Yeah, as long as you got your shit together,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Have your shit together.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like Hilary said, extra musically, and also
I see.
you gotta. I mean, I think that's one of the assumptions. I think is that people who come here have a basic level of that together, and that should be the assumption. I think.
Yeah, I would agree completely with both of you, but also would add, I think it's really smart to find your people. I found that finding my people helped me find myself, and it was so important for me, and I know that I'm, not unique in that way, but it's really important for me to be surrounded with people that I feel safe with. I do my best in that sort of situation, and there can be vibe, but then those aren't your people unless you thrive off of that. Some people really thrive off of that, that energy. I am not that
Mercenary
person.
energy.
Yeah, no, that sends me. My first gig in New York City was a disaster because of that, because it was bad vibes, and I learned really quickly that I don't care how good you are. If I'm feeling that from behind me, it's just going to be a disaster, So I think that finding your people is really helpful, and remembering that there's room for all of us.
Yeah.
It's not a competition. I mean, there is no one who sounds like you, and there is no one who is necessarily, we're, I think, extra lucky because the three of us are so different individually that we're not generally up for the same kind of work ever. There's really space for everyone. And if you don't find your space, you create it.
You create it.
Yeah.
How much of it, I mean, this is like a kind of a classic question, but how much of the ability to survive is extra musical, do you think?
Oh, God. So I
So
think
much.
it's more than the music. I think. I mean, at least in equal proportion. Because, just from my own experience, when I came here, I still feel like, oh God, today's going to be the day that they all learn I don't know what I'm doing, right? I still have that feeling every single day. But when I came to New York City, there was so much rudimentary stuff about making music that I had no idea how to do. And I was really lucky that I got to sing with a couple big bands and whatever, and be sort of, shepherded into the scene in that way by people who were much farther down the road. But I think the reason that was able to happen was because I was going to show up on time. If you needed me to wear a certain outfit, I would, within reason. But I would adhere to these really basic things. I didn't know a ton of tunes, and I didn't know how to lead a band or do any of that, but you could call me for your wedding gig because I would be where I said I would be, and I would have learned the tunes that they asked for, and the other stuff can all be acquired. You can learn that, and that's actually very freeing. I think you don't have to get too caught up in whether or not you're good enough. Just show up and do your best and be a professional, and you can learn the rest. But learn it while you're on the bandstand. Learn it while you get paid,
Yeah. So is there a living to be made?
It won't look like what you think it's going to look like.
Right.
And it's going to be a little from over here and more from over here. And I do this thing on the side, and I'm going to try, there's not a template, but I pay my rent.
Yeah, and I think it changes too. It's changed certainly for all of us. We've had times where we're doing more,
That's true.
Different kind of work, whether it's in music or not, just sort of, making ends meet while you figure out all that stuff that you need to figure out, And none of us at this point, we're not road warriors. We're not out all the time. So we're not living that life either. So everyone,
But we go out a lot.
Yeah, we've been going out a lot
do.
lately. And I think it ebbs and flows too. That first year we were out a lot. And then we, the kind of
Starting to pick up again
chilled
now,
out. And
too.
now it's, So, but we're not those. The other thing is, as a singer, you're not that bass player who's out all the time. I look at some of my friends and I'm like, I don't know how in the world you do that, because they're just constantly as a sideman out on the road. And there's something that's not only is it different from, but as a singer, you are the leader.
Yeah.
9.5 times out of 10, And so those are your gigs. So when you're on the road, you're not on the train sleeping or reading a book. You're making sure that everything is set up for the next venue, and it's a different existence. But
You're
I think
not a hired gun.
right, hardly ever. I mean, it's certainly not in a touring situation. Not that often.
Duchess, ladies of Duchess, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with me. This was really great.
Thank you.
A pleasure, Leo.
We love each other so deeply that I ask you this, sweetheart. Why should we quarrel ever? Why can't we be enough clever never to part? Every time we say goodbye, I die a little. Every time we say goodbye, I wonder why a little.
Why the gods above me,
Who must be in the know,
Think so little of me.
they allow you to go when you're near. There's such an air of spring about it. I can hear a lark somewhere begin to sing about it. There's no love song finer, but how strange the change from major to minor every time